In the dim, cloud-choked light of Albion's capital, where soot still hung in the creases of the stone walls like the memory of coal fires long gone cold, William sat before the brass-plated dial embedded in the bureau assigned to him by the Ministry of Unity. He was not a young man. His face had the pale stiffness of one too long beneath fluorescent gaslight, and his fingers were calloused from shuffling vellum-back charters. The Ministry of Unity had once been the Office of Constitutional Affairs, but all references to office or law had been stricken in favor of unity, as if the fabric of the nation would unravel at the mere mention of its legal bones. William's duty, simple and unending, was to review the historical records of the kingdom and bring them into accordance with current orthodoxy. He stared at the latest file, a curling parchment bearing the stamp of the ancient Lords of Session. It concerned the great constitutional continuity of the kingdom, which the ministry had recently declared eternal and indivisible. That was not the whole truth, and William knew it. But knowing was dangerous. The ministry instructed that there had never been a break in the sanctity of tradition, and that the law, like the crown, had never been questioned, only perfected. Yet William had read of the glorious change, when Parliament had once risen to limit the crown, of the time when Magna Carta had summoned the image of justice into the common square, and of the Whigs who had dared speak of liberty and parliamentary supremacy. He had read too of the Tories, guardians of throne and altar, who had fought to preserve the world as it had always been. The parchment in his hand still bore a quote from Edmund Burke, the old philosopher who had once written that a state without the means of change is without the means of conservation. That line had not yet been excised. William hesitated. It did not align with current orthodoxy, which proclaimed that all progress must derive from eternal foundations, unchanging and sacred. But to strike the line would be to erase the man. And Burke, though troublesome, was now required reading for junior analysts in the Ministry of Heritage. He was the acceptable face of doubt, safe because he was dead. He looked out the slit of a window above his desk. Below, the great black obelisk of the Parliament Tower cast its shadow across the river, its crest marked not with any flag but with the gilded symbol of the organic state, a knot of vines, roots, and crowned lions twisting into each other. It was said to represent the interwoven strength of nation, tradition, and law. But to William, it looked like a tangle of restraints. There had been a time, buried in the sanctioned histories, when Whigs and Tories had debated openly in chambers of oak and smoke. Their words had once moved the levers of power. The Whigs had advocated reform, liberty, the rule of written law. The Tories had defended the old order, monarchy, church, and customary right. Over time, they had merged into shadows of themselves. The Whigs became liberals, the Tories became conservatives, and eventually both dissolved into the ministry. Now there were no parties, only traditions. And traditions did not argue. The Constitution was said to be unwritten, an invisible thread binding the hearts of the people. But William knew that thread had been knotted and broken many times. The Charter of Rights, the Acts of Union, the Bill of Settlement, all had once been documents of defiance, of rebellion dressed in velvet. They were now curated in the Hall of Continuity, displayed behind glass and never cited. Each week, William's supervisor, a gaunt man known only as Controller Hawthorne, would pass through the rows of desks, tapping random pages with his polished cane. When Hawthorne came, the analysts sat straighter. They corrected anything not in harmony with unity principle. Hawthorne was a traditionalist of the newer kind. He believed, as all good citizens must, that the Constitution had always been perfect because it had never been fixed in ink. It had evolved like a living body, safely, predictably, and above all, from within. One day, William received a sealed directive. It bore the red wax crest of the Inner Circle, a rare and ominous seal. Inside was an assignment: review entries on Whiggish heresies and re-evaluate their role in organic development. It was signed with the glyph of the arch-historian. William knew what this meant. The ministry had decided to acclaim the Whigs as ancestral conservatives. Their talk of reform and liberty would now be called expressions of loyalty to enduring tradition. Their opposition to arbitrary rule would be reframed as defense of organic hierarchy. Even their alliance with radicals would be interpreted as a strategic safeguarding of constitutional evolution. He opened the archives of the Whig era and began his work. His pen scratched out the phrases radical dissent, merchant autonomy, and dissenting faith. In their place, he wrote communitarian prudence, economic stewardship, and moral preservation. The Whigs, once enemies of the Crown, would now be its early architects. It was not untrue, only adjusted. Later, William was called before a tribunal of review officers. They sat beneath a carved frieze of St. Edward, patron of continuity, flanked by lions and scrolls. Their questions were polite, their eyes blank. "Do you accept the Constitution as the breath of the kingdom?" one asked. "I do," William replied. "Do you believe that tradition, not novelty, is the source of legitimacy?" "I do." "And the role of Parliament is not to invent, but to preserve?" "Yes," he said, though the air grew colder with each word. They nodded and dismissed him. As he left, he passed a group of new initiates reciting passages from the Book of Custom. A boy not more than 20 recited, "From time immemorial, the law has spoken through the Crown, and the Crown through Parliament, and Parliament through tradition." His voice wavered, unsure. An overseer struck the table with a rod. The boy began again. Back in his chamber, William stared at the flame flickering in the oil lamp. In a drawer, beneath his authorized documents, he kept a faded pamphlet. Its title had been smudged by time, but the words inside were clear. It was the final address of a long-dead radical who had once declared that all power must be held accountable to the people. William read it sometimes when the corridors fell silent. He never spoke of it, never quoted it. But he remembered the shape of its thought. He knew that the Constitution, as they now taught it, was not a single story but a shifting tapestry of interpretations. It was both sword and shield, monument and mirage. In it, the Whigs were now traditionalists, the Tories guardians of the people, and even the ancient radicals were painted as misunderstood patriots whose reforms had only strengthened the Crown. Outside, the bells tolled for a new legal session. The House of Commons, purged of parties and debate, would meet to affirm the minister's declaration of civic harmony. The House of Lords, appointed by heritage and oath, would nod in solemn silence. The Crown would assent, as always. And William would return to his desk, adjust the lines of history, and ensure that the story of the kingdom remained intact, uninterrupted, and invulnerable to memory. That night, as he walked home past the marble statues of lawmakers and monarchs, he saw a child staring at a bronze plaque. The plaque bore the words, "The Constitution is not written in law but in the hearts of the faithful." The child turned and asked, "But if it is not written, how do we know what it means?" William smiled but said nothing. In his silence, he preserved the only rebellion still allowed, a thought that belongs to no tribunal.